$3,000. 10 years of brutal labor. Every dollar earned through sweat and suffering and loneliness. Ethan Cole rode into Grant Valley ready to buy his dream. Land so beautiful it took his breath away. Mountains standing guard. Grass tall enough to hide a calf. A future that was finally his. Then a dying man made him an offer he never expected. "I'm offering you the valley, $3,000 cash. Fair deal. But there's a condition. Name it. You marry my daughter, tonight, before sunrise." The daughter didn't want him. The father was hiding something, and a powerful rancher named Dawson had been obsessed with this family for 20 years, an obsession that started with the mother, and now fixated on the daughter. What Ethan found in Dawson's basement would haunt him forever. A shrine. Portraits of a dead woman. Dresses on headless forms. A journal describing plans for the daughter that made his blood run cold. She'll understand. They always understand in the end. Ethan came to buy land. Instead, he walked into a 20-year nightmare and became the only thing standing between a madman and the woman he was forced to call wife. What happens next will show you how a marriage born of desperation can become something worth dying for. This story carries a truth that will stay with you. Some bargains seem unfair at the start, but reveal themselves as gifts in the end. And belonging isn't about the land. It's about the people you choose to build your life with. If you've ever felt trapped by circumstances beyond your control, this story will show you that even forced beginnings can lead to chosen love. If you believe that the best things in life are earned, not given, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. More stories like this are coming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had something that seemed like a disaster turn into a blessing? And if someone you know needs to hear that their circumstances don't define their destiny, share this story with them. Let's ride. Ethan Cole rode into Grant Valley after 3 days through wilderness so remote he had not seen another human soul since leaving the last trading post. The land took his breath away the moment he crested the ridge and looked down. A perfect valley spread before him, clear water running through the center, grass tall enough to hide a calf, mountains standing guard on 3 sides like ancient sentinels protecting something precious. This was what 10 years of brutal labor had bought him the chance to own. 10 years of logging camps where the cold turned your breath to ice. Cattle drives where dust coated your lungs until you coughed mud. Mining camps where men died in the dark and nobody remembered their names. $3,000. Everything he had saved, every dollar earned through sweat and suffering and loneliness. And now, finally, he had enough to buy something that would be his. Truly his. He was intercepted at the valley's edge by 3 riders wearing matching gun belts and unfriendly expressions. They did not threaten him directly, just made clear he was being watched. The lead rider spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Mr. Dawson wants you to know there ain't nothing for sale in this valley. Save yourself the trouble and ride on back where you came from." Ethan kept his voice level. "I don't work for Mr. Dawson, and I didn't ride 3 days to turn around because someone's hired hands told me to." The riders exchanged glances. Then the leader shrugged and moved his horse aside. "Your funeral, stranger." They let him pass, but the message was clear. Someone named Dawson considered this valley already his. Ethan filed that information away and kept riding toward the ranch house he could see in the distance. The house was solid but showing age. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, the smoke of a dying fire in a dying house. An old black man met him at the door. His eyes studied Ethan with suspicion that spoke of hard experience and earned mistrust. He did not speak, just gestured for Ethan to follow him inside. The bedroom smelled of sickness, that particular combination of sweat and medicine and something darker that spoke of a body giving up its fight. Silas Grant lay propped against pillows, skin gray as ash, breathing labored as a bellows with a hole in it. But his eyes were sharp as broken glass. The eyes of a man who had been fighting his whole life and was not done yet. "You're Cole," The one with cash money and dreams of owning something. Yes, sir. I'm here to buy your valley. Your telegram said you were willing to sell. Silas laughed. It turned into a cough that shook his whole frame. I said I was willing to deal. Didn't say nothing about selling. There's a difference. He explained the situation with the bluntness of a man who had no time left for dancing around the truth. A rancher named Robert Dawson had been trying to take this valley for 20 years. Once Silas died, his daughter Lydia would be alone. And a woman alone in Wyoming territory was prey for men like Dawson. I'm offering you the valley and everything on it. $3,000 worth of land for $3,000 cash. Fair deal. But there's a condition. Name it. You marry my daughter. Tonight. Before sunrise. Ethan stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. You're out of your mind. I came here to buy land, not a wife. Then you came to the wrong place. The land comes with the woman or it don't come at all. Find someone else to play husband. I ain't interested. He walked out before Silas could respond. On the porch, Ethan nearly collided with a woman coming up the steps. She carried a rifle over her shoulder with the ease of someone who had held one since childhood. She was not what he expected. Not soft, not delicate. There was steel in her eyes and calluses on her hands and something fierce in the set of her jaw. Leaving already. Most men at least stay for supper before they run. Your father wants me to marry you by morning. That ain't a business deal, that's insanity. For the first time, something other than hardness flickered across her face. Almost a smile. Almost. On that, Mr. Cole, we finally agree. She pushed past him into the house. Ethan watched her go, disturbed by something he could not name. He made camp near the property line, planning to leave at first light. Built a small fire. Ate cold beans from a tin. Lay back against his saddle and stared at stars that looked the same here as they had everywhere else he had wandered for the last 10 years. He was half asleep when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Then a woman's scream. Ethan ran toward the sound without thinking. Found 2 men dragging Lydia Grant toward their horses. She was fighting, biting, kicking, clawing, but they were too strong. One of them laughed. Mr. Dawson says if you won't come willing, you'll come otherwise. Lydia spat in his face. I'll kill him. I'll kill you all. Ethan tackled the first man from behind. Put him down with 2 brutal punches that left his knuckles aching. The second drew a pistol. Ethan wrenched it away and turned it on the man's face. His hand shook. 3 years since he had held a gun. The weight of it brought back everything. Daniel's body on the floor, the blood spreading, the failure. But Lydia was staring at him, waiting. He fired. The bullet took the man in the shoulder. Both riders fled into the darkness, one of them leaving a trail of blood. Lydia stood slowly, breathing hard, a bruise already forming on her cheek. You're either very brave or very stupid. Ethan let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Probably both. Back at the house, Silas Grant was somehow sitting up in bed as if he had known exactly what would happen. Now you understand. Dawson don't want to buy this valley. He wants to take it. And he wants my daughter even more than the land. Why her? There must be dozens of women. Silas's eyes went dark. Because she's Eleanor's daughter, and Dawson has wanted Eleanor since before Lydia was born. The words hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Ethan looked at Lydia, who stood rigid by the door, refusing to show weakness even with a bruise blooming on her face. If I do this, if I marry her, what happens when you die? She'll be stuck with a stranger she don't want. Better a stranger who'll protect her than a monster who'll own her. Long silence. Ethan knew he should walk away. This was not his fight. He had come for land, for peace, for a place so remote he would never have to be responsible for another person's life again. But he looked at Lydia, at the bruise on her face, at the way she held herself like a blade waiting to be drawn. And he thought about all the times he had arrived too late. I'll marry her, but not for the land, because nobody deserves what those men were going to do to her. Dawn light crept through the windows as the traveling preacher spoke the words. Lydia's face was stone. Ethan's hands hung at his sides. The old black man Hosea watched from the corner, his expression unreadable. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Ethan turned to Lydia. She did not move, did not soften. He leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not a kiss of passion, a promise. Silas signed the deed with a shaking hand. His signature was barely legible, but it was legal. It was done. That night, Ethan lay awake in the small room Lydia had banished him to. Through the thin walls, he heard her voice talking to someone. "It's done, Hosea. I have a husband now. Father got what he wanted." A pause. The old man must have been responding in that silent way of his. "No, I don't trust him. I don't trust anyone. But he can shoot. And right now, that's worth more than trust." Another pause, then words that made Ethan's blood run cold. "When the time comes, I'll do what needs to be done, with or without him." Ethan returned to his bed. Sleep was a long time coming. What was she planning? What did she mean by what needs to be done? And what had he gotten himself into by saying "I do" to a woman whose eyes held secrets darker than any he had imagined? The land had seemed like such a simple dream. But nothing about Lydia Grant was simple. And Ethan Cole was beginning to realize that the price of his valley might be higher than $3,000 and a wedding vow. It might cost him everything. Morning came cold and gray. Ethan found Lydia in the kitchen, coffee already made, her face set in lines that dared him to mention anything about the night before. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "Let's be clear about what this is. You sleep in the back room. You don't touch me. You don't ask about my past. We work this ranch together during the day and pretend the other don't exist at night. Agreed?" Ethan poured himself coffee. "Agreed. But I got conditions, too. You tell me when there's danger. You don't go riding alone. And you don't make plans that involve my life without letting me know first." Their eyes met across the kitchen table. A clash of wills. Neither looked away. "Fine, fine." The word hung between them like a challenge accepted. Over the following days, they established a rhythm that was more truce than partnership. Ethan threw himself into the work of the ranch, mending fences that had gone too long without repair, tending the small herd of cattle, doing the labor of 3 men because there was only him and Hosea, and the work would not wait. His body remembered this labor, even if his heart was somewhere else. The ache in his shoulders, the calluses forming fresh on his hands, the bone-deep tiredness that came from honest work under an honest sun. Lydia managed the house and the books, but she was no domestic creature content to stay inside. Ethan saw her practice shooting behind the barn. Her aim was deadly, every shot finding center. He saw her ride like she had been born in the saddle. He saw her work as hard as any man he had ever known. Hosea watched them both, silent and watchful. The old man did not trust Ethan. That much was clear in the way his eyes followed every move Ethan made. But he did not interfere. Silas Grant declined rapidly. Within days of the wedding, he could barely leave his bed. The gray in his skin deepened. His breathing grew more labored. Death was coming, and it was not being patient about it. Lydia tended her father with fierce devotion. But Ethan noticed something else. She examined his medicine carefully, sniffed his food, studied his symptoms with troubled eyes that suggested she was looking for something specific. When he asked about it, she shut him down cold. "My father is dying. That's all you need to know." But Ethan filed it away. Something was not right, something beyond the natural course of illness. 3 nights after the wedding, Ethan woke screaming. The nightmare was always the same. He was in the bank in Abilene again. Daniel was on the floor, bleeding out, reaching for him. "You're late, Ethan. You're always late." The blood spread until it filled the room, rising to his chest, his throat drowning him in failure. He gasped awake to find Lydia standing in his doorway, a lamp in her hand, her face unreadable. "You were shouting a name. Daniel." Ethan's hands were still shaking. "My brother. He's dead." "How?" "Because I wasn't fast enough to save him." She did not offer comfort, did not speak empty words of sympathy that would have meant nothing. She just nodded once, like she understood something words could not touch. "We all have ghosts, Mr. Cole. The trick is not letting them drive." She left, but something had shifted between them. The first crack in the wall. 4 days after the wedding, Silas Grant died in the night. Lydia found him in the morning, eyes open, hand reaching toward the window that faced the valley he had spent his life building. She closed his eyes without tears. The grief was too deep for that. They buried him on the hill overlooking the valley, next to a grave marker that read, "Eleanor Grant, beloved wife and mother." Hosea dug the grave himself, refusing all help. His face was stone, but his shoulders shook with silent sobs. At the funeral, Ethan noticed Lydia's hands, clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. She was not just grieving. She was furious. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. He could. Was it natural? His death? Her jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." The day after the funeral, Robert Dawson himself arrived to pay respects. He was a big man, well-dressed in clothes that cost more than most ranchers made in a year. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had never had to accept less than exactly what he wanted. He brought flowers for the grave, condolences that sounded rehearsed. But when he looked at Lydia, Ethan saw something that made his stomach turn. Hunger, not simple lust, something deeper, something obsessive. The way a man might look at a painting he had been trying to buy for decades. "Your father was a stubborn man, Lydia. I respected that about him even when we disagreed. I hope you know my door is always open. Whatever you need. What I need is for you to leave my property." Dawson smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Still have your mother's fire. She was the same way. All thorns until you got close enough to see the rose underneath." Ethan stepped forward, putting himself between them. "The lady asked you to leave." Dawson's eyes shifted to Ethan, measuring, calculating, finding him wanting. The new husband, bought with land and desperation. "You know she don't love you. You know this marriage is just a business arrangement. That's between me and my wife, not your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern, Mr. Cole. Has been for 20 years, will be for 20 more. Enjoy playing house while it lasts." He tipped his hat and rode away, but the threat lingered like smoke after a fire. That night, Ethan saw Lydia slip out of the house. He followed at a distance, watching as she walked to a massive oak tree at the edge of the property. She knelt and began to dig with her bare hands, frantic, desperate, like she was unearthing something she had buried a long time ago. She pulled out a metal box, opened it, pulled out what looked like papers. Ethan stepped on a branch. The crack was loud in the quiet night. Lydia spun, drew a pistol with speed that would have impressed any gunfighter. The barrel pointed straight at his chest. "Give me one reason not to shoot you, because I'm on your side. Even if you don't believe it yet. You don't know anything about my side, then tell me. Whatever's in that box, whatever you're planning, you don't have to do it alone." She stared at him, the gun still raised. Moonlight caught the tears she had been hiding. They gleamed on her cheeks like liquid silver. "If I tell you there's no going back, you'll be part of this, whatever happens. I'm already part of it, the moment I said I do." Slowly, she lowered the gun. "Not here. Not tonight. Tomorrow when Hosea can watch the roads, then I'll show you why Robert Dawson has to die." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Not why Robert Dawson needs to be stopped. Not why he needs to be brought to justice. Why he has to die. What had he married into? What darkness was hiding behind those fierce eyes? And why, despite everything, did he find himself wanting to help her anyway? The next morning, tension filled the house like water rising in a flooding cellar. Lydia avoided Ethan until midday when Hosea signaled with a nod that the roads were clear of watchers. She led Ethan to her father's study, a room he had never been allowed to enter. The door creaked as it opened, releasing the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco and memories. Maps covered the walls, documents stacked on every surface, and in the center of it all, a single framed photograph. A beautiful woman with dark hair and eyes that matched Lydia's exactly. My mother? Eleanor. She died when I was 8. I'm sorry. Lydia's voice hardened. Don't be sorry yet. You ain't heard the rest. She told him about Dawson's obsession, how he had courted Eleanor before Silas did, how she rejected him for a poor rancher with nothing but dreams and determination, how Dawson had never forgiven either of them. When my mother was dying, Dawson came to see her. My father tried to stop him, but he pushed through. I was hiding under the bed. Her voice went distant, like she was watching something far away, something terrible. Dawson knelt beside her bed, said she should have chosen him, that he would have given her everything. My mother was so weak she could barely speak, but she looked him in the eye and said she chose love, something he would never understand. What did he say? He said he would wait, that I looked just like her, that someday I would understand what she never did. Lydia's hands were shaking. He's been watching me ever since, waiting. That's why my father was so desperate. He knew what Dawson really wanted. Ethan felt sick. This was not just a land dispute. This was a predator's 20-year obsession transferred from mother to daughter. We should go to the territorial marshal. The territorial marshal works for Dawson. Everyone works for Dawson. The sheriff, the judge, the surveyor. He owns this territory. Then we go higher. Federal authorities. With what evidence? The word of a rancher's daughter against the richest man in Wyoming. They'll laugh us out of the building. She was right. Ethan knew she was right. But there had to be something. What's in the box? The one you dug up last night? Lydia hesitated. Her hand went to her pocket where Ethan could see the outline of folded paper. Not yet. I need to know I can trust you first. How do I prove that? Time, Mr. Cole. Trust takes time. That afternoon they found 10 cattle with their throats cut in the south pasture. The blood had soaked into the ground. Flies were already gathering. Written in blood on the rocks was a single word. Mine. Lydia stood over the carnage, trembling with rage. He's marking his territory, showing us he can do anything he wants. We report this to the sheriff, and the sheriff will write it down and lose the paperwork. I've seen it before. But Ethan noticed something else. A distinctive knife left in one of the carcasses. Initials carved into the handle. R.D. He's getting careless. Or he wants us to know it was him. He wants us to feel helpless, to know that nobody will save us. Ethan pulled the knife free, wiped the blood on his pants. Then we don't wait to be saved. That night, Ethan found Lydia sitting on the porch, staring at stars that looked cold and distant. He sat down beside her without asking permission. When I was a girl, my mother used to name the constellations. She said every star was a story waiting to be told. Ethan leaned back against the porch rail. My brother used to make up stories, heroes who always saved the day. I think he actually believed the world worked that way. Did he die believing it? The question cut deep. I hope so. I hope he never saw me fail him. Long silence. The wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere far away, a coyote called to the moon. Maybe you didn't fail him. Maybe you just weren't meant to be there. Ethan shook his head. That's the same thing. No, it ain't. Failure is a choice. Fate is what happens despite our choices. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. For the first time since they met, her eyes held something other than suspicion or anger. You ain't what I expected, Ethan Cole. Neither are you. Neither moved closer, but something had shifted. The wall between them had another crack. Near midnight, Ethan heard horses. He looked out to see 5 riders stopped at the property line, just watching the house, not attacking. Not approaching, just watching. The message was clear. We can reach you any time. Ethan checked the pistol he had taken from Dawson's man that first night. His hand shook, but less than before. He was starting to remember who he used to be. 1 week after Silas died, Dawson sent a formal offer through his lawyer. $15,000 for the valley. 5 times what it was worth. Lydia threw the papers in the fireplace, watched them burn. Tell your master this land will never be his. Not for any price. But that night she sat with the account books, her face pale. We have maybe 4 months of operating money. After that, we'll have to sell cattle. But nobody will buy from us if they know Dawson's watching. He's going to starve us out. Then we don't play defense anymore. Meaning if he's coming for us anyway, we might as well make him work for it. They began preparing the ranch for siege. Ethan used his old lawman's training to identify defensive positions. Escape routes, early warning systems. Lydia knew every inch of the land and showed him where to set up watching posts. You know, for a rancher's daughter, you think like a soldier. My father taught me this land would have to be defended someday. He just didn't think it would be so soon. Hosea proved invaluable. The old man knew trails through the mountains that were not on any map. He could come and go without Dawson's men seeing him. Behind the barn, Ethan practiced shooting for the first time in 3 years. His hands shook. His aim was off. The gun felt like a weight he was not worthy to carry. Lydia watched from a distance, then walked over. You're aiming with your guilt instead of your eye. Excuse me. Every time you pull the trigger, you flinch, like you're expecting to fail. That ain't your arm's memory, that's your heart's memory. She adjusted his stance, her hands on his arms. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him. Your brother is dead. You can't save him. But I'm alive, and so are you. Focus on that. She stepped back. Ethan raised the pistol. This time when he fired, his hand was steady. The bullet hit dead center. 3 nights later, Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was ablaze. Not a natural fire, but arson. Flames spreading too fast and too evenly. By the time they reached it, the structure was engulfed. 20 head of cattle were trapped inside. They could hear the animals screaming. Lydia tried to run in. Ethan tackled her, held her back while she fought him. Let me go. I can save them. You can't. The roof's coming down. The barn collapsed with a roar that echoed across the valley. The screaming stopped. In the ashes, they found another knife with Dawson's initials. And a note. This is just the beginning. Lydia did not cry. She walked to the property line facing Dawson's territory and screamed into the darkness. You want a war. You have one. I'll burn your whole empire down before I let you win. Ethan had never seen her like this. Wild, untamed, dangerous. He realized with a chill that she was capable of killing, and she might be planning exactly that. Back in the house, her fury had turned cold. She paced like a caged animal. We're done defending, done waiting. He thinks he can push us around because we're weak. I'll show him weak. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to go on the offensive. We need evidence that will stick, something even his bought judges can't ignore, and I know where to find it. Where? His ranch. Marcus showed me a back way in years ago. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Who's Marcus? Lydia's face went still. Her hand moved to her pocket. To the papers she had been hiding. Marcus was Robert Dawson's son. And 5 years ago, he was the man I was going to marry. Ethan felt the world tilt. Dawson's son. What happened to him? Robert Dawson happened to him. Robert Dawson killed his own son. And I watched him do it. She pulled out the papers, yellowed, creased, stained with what might have been tears or might have been blood. This is Marcus's letter. He wrote it the night before he died. He knew his father was going to kill him. He named witnesses. He told me where to find proof, and I've been waiting 5 years for the chance to use it. Lydia spread Marcus's letter on the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the creases. The handwriting was elegant but rushed, the writing of a man who knew time was running out. She read it aloud, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. If you're reading this, my father has done what I always feared he would. He cannot allow me to choose you over the family name. His obsession with your mother has twisted into something monstrous, and now that obsession includes you." She paused, swallowed hard. "There is a witness. Jacob Mercer, the foreman. He knows everything. And in my father's study there is a ledger where he records his acquisitions. It will show every rancher he's destroyed, every official he's bribed. Use it, Lydia. Destroy him. And know that I loved you, truly. Not the way my father loves, but the way love is meant to be." Silence filled the kitchen. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the wind moaned through the gaps in the walls. Ethan set down the letter carefully, like it might shatter if he was not gentle with it. "Why didn't you use this 5 years ago?" "Because I was 19. Because my father said we needed to be patient. Because I was afraid." She looked at him directly, her eyes fierce. "I ain't afraid anymore. And I'm done being patient." They made their plan. The next cattle auction in Medicine Rock would draw Dawson and most of his men away from the ranch. That was when Ethan would infiltrate, find the ledger, find whatever else might be hidden. I should be the one going. If someone gets caught better, it's me. Lydia shook her head. "You don't know the way." "I do." "Then teach me." She drew him a map from memory. Every trail, every guard post, every window. Marcus's knowledge kept alive through her love for a dead man. "The study is on the second floor, east wing." "But there's another room. Marcus mentioned it once." Marcus mentioned his father's private sanctuary. "It's in the basement behind a bookshelf. Nobody is allowed inside. If there's real evidence, it's there." 3 days later, Ethan rode out under cover of darkness. The route was treacherous. Mountain trails that barely existed. Drops so steep, one misstep meant death. His horse picked its way carefully while Ethan prayed to whatever god might be listening. He reached the Dawson Ranch near midnight. It was massive, more fortress than house. But just as Lydia had said, the back was poorly guarded. Dawson's arrogance was showing. Ethan slipped through a cellar window and moved through the darkened house, his boots silent on thick carpets that probably cost more than his father had earned in a lifetime. The study was easy to find. The ledger was exactly where Marcus said it would be. Ethan flipped through pages of neat handwriting. Records of bribery going back 20 years. Names of judges and sheriffs and territorial officials. Amounts paid. Favors received. It was enough to bring down half the territory's government. But Ethan remembered the other room, the basement sanctuary. He found the bookshelf, ran his fingers along the spines until he felt the hidden mechanism. A soft click. The shelf swung open. What he found on the other side made his blood run cold. The room was a shrine. Portraits of Eleanor Grant covered the walls. Eleanor as a young woman. Eleanor on her wedding day, but with Dawson painted in place of Silas. Eleanor lying in what looked like peaceful sleep, but was clearly death. Her dresses hung on forms arranged around the room like headless women frozen in time. Her hairbrush sat on a vanity. Strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. Glass cases held locks of her hair. Her jewelry. Even what appeared to be a baby tooth from Lydia's childhood. And in the center of the room, a chair facing the largest portrait. The seat worn smooth from years of use. This was where Dawson came every night. Where he talked to a dead woman as if she was still alive. Ethan whispered into the darkness. Good God. He found a journal in Dawson's hand. Recent entries. Lydia grows more beautiful every day. More like Eleanor before Silas corrupted her. Soon she'll understand. The new husband is nothing, a tool that can be removed. Once he's gone, and she's alone again, she'll see that I'm the only one who truly loves her, the only one who ever loved Eleanor. The last entry was from 3 days ago. I've been patient long enough. Silas took 20 years from me. I won't waste another month. The Christmas ball. I'll make my intentions known. She'll resist at first. Eleanor did too. But she'll understand. They always understand in the end. Ethan was almost out when a guard appeared. Young, maybe 20, more scared than threatening. "Who are you? What are you?" Ethan moved fast, disarmed him, pinned him against the wall. "I ain't going to hurt you, but I need you to forget you saw me. Mr. Dawson will kill me if... Mr. Dawson is going to kill a lot of people if I don't stop him. Which side you want to be on when this ends?" The guard hesitated. Something in his eyes shifted. Then he stepped aside. "I didn't see nothing." Ethan ran. He rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than was safe. The evidence he carried felt like it was burning a hole in his saddlebag. He reached the Grant Ranch at dawn. Lydia was on the porch, rifle ready, face pale with worry. "Did you find it?" "I found more than I wanted to." He told her about the shrine, about the journal, about the Christmas ball. "He's planning something, Lydia. Something big. And he's planning it for you." Her face went white, then hard as stone. "Then we stop planning and start acting." "Where's Jacob Mercer?" "Gold Creek, according to the letter. 2 days' ride. Then you leave tomorrow. I'll..." She was interrupted by Hosea bursting through the door, his face grave, his hands moving rapidly in signs Ethan could not read. Lydia translated, her voice tight. "Riders coming. 20 of them. Dawson's entire outfit." They looked toward the valley road. The dust cloud was visible even from here. "He ain't waiting for Christmas. He's coming now." Dawson did not attack directly. That was not his way. Instead, his men formed a perimeter around the valley, cutting off all routes in and out. No supplies, no communication, no escape. He rode up to speaking distance himself, flanked by his foreman, wearing a smile that made Ethan's trigger finger itch. "Mrs. Cole, or should I say Miss Grant, since we both know this marriage is a sham, I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Lydia's voice rang out from the porch. "There ain't nothing honest about you, Robert. I know someone was in my house last night. I know what they saw. I imagine your husband is quite disturbed by now." Ethan stepped forward, rifle ready. "Did you enjoy my collection, Mr. Cole?" 20 years of devotion. Your wife comes from exceptional stock. Her mother was remarkable. Lydia is even more so. You're insane." Dawson laughed. "Love often looks like insanity to those who ain't never felt it." He made his offer. Lydia comes with him willingly. Ethan gets to leave with his life and a generous payment. Refuse and they all starve. "I'd rather die. That can be arranged, but I'd prefer you live. You can't give me children if you're dead." The crude statement revealed the depth of his delusion. This was not just obsession. This was ownership. 3 days of siege followed. Dawson's men maintained the blockade. No violence, just pressure. The Grant Ranch began to run low on supplies. Ethan and Lydia took turns keeping watch. Neither slept more than a few hours at a time. Hosea maintained the house, prepared what food they had, watched for any weakness in the perimeter. On the second night, Ethan found Lydia at her mother's grave, talking to the headstone. "I failed, Mama. I should have acted years ago. Now he's going to win, just like he always said he would." Ethan approached quietly. "He ain't won yet. He's got 20 guns. We've got 3. The math ain't complicated. Math don't account for everything. Daniel used to say that the numbers never tell the whole story." He sat beside her on the cold ground. "Tell me about Marcus. What was he like?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, tender, a voice he had never heard from her before. "He was kind, gentle, nothing like his father. He used to bring me wildflowers, said they were the only things in the world as beautiful as me. He believed in things, in love, in goodness, in a future where we could be happy." Tears spilled down her cheeks, the first she had shed in front of anyone since Marcus died. And his father killed him for it. Killed him because he dared to love someone other than who Robert chose. Ethan took her hand. She did not pull away. Then we make sure it wasn't for nothing. Marcus gathered evidence. He named a witness. He gave us a weapon. We just have to find the courage to use it. How? We're trapped here. The next morning, Hosea signaled for a private conversation. He led them to his quarters, a small room barely bigger than a closet. On the bed lay a hand-drawn map. Trails through the mountains even Lydia did not know. She read his notes aloud. You know a way out. Hosea nodded. He wrote on a slate. I can get to Gold Creek unseen. Find the witness. Bring back help. Ethan shook his head. That's a 4-day journey through mountain passes. In winter, alone. It's suicide. Hosea wrote again. I am old. I have lived my life. You are young. You are the future of this valley. Let me do something that matters. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself. You're all I have left. Hosea took her hands gently, made signs that Lydia translated through sobs. He says he's been ready to die for this family since the day my mother saved him from the men who wanted to return him to bondage. He says Eleanor would want him to protect her daughter, that this is his choice, his gift. Ethan watched this exchange, the deep love between them. 20 years of loyalty earned through sacrifice and kindness. Is there another way? Hosea shook his head. There was not. That night, under cover of darkness, Hosea prepared to leave. Lydia embraced him, her face buried in his shoulder. Come back. Promise me you'll come back. Hosea signed something she did not translate, but Ethan saw her face crumble. The old man slipped into the darkness. Within minutes, he had vanished completely. What did he say? At the end. Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. He said some promises ain't meant to be kept. Some are meant to be hoped for. The next morning came gray and cold. Dawson's men continued the blockade. Everything seemed normal. Then one of the riders approached the house. Something tied to his saddle. It was a body. Hosea's body. His throat had been cut. Pinned to his chest was a note. The next one is her, unless she comes to me. Lydia knelt beside Hosea's body, her hands covered in his blood. She did not scream, did not cry. She went somewhere far away inside herself. When she looked up at Ethan, her eyes were empty. No more plans, no more waiting. I'm going to kill him myself. Lydia, get out of my way, or I'll kill you too. She meant it. Ethan could see she meant it. The grief had pushed her past breaking. But then he noticed something. Something Hosea was clutching in his dead hand. A piece of paper. He must have been holding it when he died. Ethan pried it loose. His heart stopped. It was a map. The route to Gold Creek, marked with a location. On the back, in Hosea's shaky handwriting, Jacob Mercer, cabin by the falls. He knows I was coming. He'll help. Don't let my death be meaningless. Fight smart. For Eleanor, Lydia. Look, she looked. Her eyes widened. He did it. He found the witness. Her voice broke. He died thinking he'd failed. He died not knowing. Then we make sure his death means something. We use what he gave us. We bring Dawson down. The right way. For Hosea. For Marcus. For everyone that monster has hurt. Lydia stood slowly. The emptiness in her eyes was replaced by something harder. Not madness. Purpose. How do we get out? The blockade. We don't both go. I go for Mercer. You stay and hold the ranch. Alone. Against 20 men. You ain't alone. You're Silas Grant's daughter. You're Eleanor's daughter. You're the woman who survived Dawson for 5 years and didn't break. You can hold this ranch for 3 more days. She looked at him. This stranger she had married, who had become something more. If you don't come back, I'll come back. I have something to come back for now. He leaned in. She met him halfway. Their first real kiss. Desperate. Fierce. A promise written in breath and touch. That's so you remember what you're fighting for, like I could forget. Using Hosea's map, Ethan took the mountain trails. Paths so narrow his horse had to step carefully. Drops so steep, one misstep meant death. He traveled for 2 days, surviving on dried meat and melted snow. The solitude gave him time to think about Daniel, about Lydia, about the man he used to be and the man he was becoming. The nightmares came both nights, but they were different now. Daniel still appeared, still said, "You're late." But in these dreams, Ethan answered back, "Not this time." On the second night, he was ambushed. 2 of Dawson's men had been tracking him. They came out of the darkness with guns drawn and murder in their eyes. The fight was brutal and close. Ethan killed the first man with a knife. The gun would have been too loud, would have alerted others. The blade went in between the ribs and the man died gurgling on his own blood. The second tackled him. They rolled toward a cliff edge, grappling for survival. The man's hands found Ethan's throat. For a moment, Ethan froze. The memory of Daniel's death flooding back. The blood, the failure, the 5 minutes that had cost him everything. "You're late, Ethan. You're always late." Daniel's voice. But this time, instead of paralyzing him, it filled him with fury. "Not this time." He threw the man off, sent him tumbling over the cliff edge. The scream echoed for a long time. Ethan lay there, breathing hard, staring at stars that looked brighter than they had in years. "Not this time, Daniel. I promise." Gold Creek was a ghost town. Mines played out. Most people moved on. The few who remained were the kind who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Jacob Mercer lived in a cabin by a frozen waterfall, a broken man drinking himself to death. He looked up when Ethan walked in, his eyes red-rimmed and full of fear he had been carrying for 5 years. "I know why you're here. The old slave came through 3 days ago. Told me what you need. Then you know we need your testimony. I know Dawson will kill me if I talk. He's killing people anyway. He killed Hosea. He killed his own son. How many more have to die because you're afraid?" Mercer's hands shook. "Not from alcohol. From genuine terror. You don't understand. I saw what he did to Marcus. Beat that boy until he couldn't scream anymore. Then made his girl watch while he finished it. I tried to stop him. That's why he fired me. Said if I ever spoke a word, he'd do the same to my family. Your family is gone, Mercer. Your wife died 3 years ago. Your children moved east. There ain't nothing left for Dawson to take from you except your conscience." Long silence. Mercer poured himself another drink, but he did not lift it. "I loved that boy. Marcus raised him more than his father ever did. When I close my eyes, I still hear him begging, still see her face, the Grant girl. Watching him die, he set down the glass. All right, I'll testify, but not to some bought judge in Medicine Rock. You want my words to matter, you get them to someone who can actually act on them. Who? There's a circuit judge, William Hargrove. Rides through Cheyenne next month. He's territorial, but he's honest. Dawson tried to buy him years ago and failed. If we can get evidence to Hargrove, he'll issue arrest warrants that even Dawson can't ignore." Meanwhile, at the ranch, Lydia was holding out. Dawson had not attacked directly. He was waiting, assuming time would break her. She rationed food, kept watch, and waited. On the second day alone, she went through her father's things one final time, looking for anything that might help, anything she might have missed. She found something hidden in the lining of his coat, a small bottle labeled in medical Latin. She took it to the kitchen, examined it against the bottles of medicine the doctor had prescribed for Silas. The compounds matched, the dosage did not. Her father had not just been dying, he had been poisoned, slowly, over months. Probably by the doctor himself, a man who accepted payment from Dawson. Silas Grant was murdered, 1 drop at a time. Lydia did not break, did not scream. She took the bottle and added it to the evidence pile. Another crime, another reason. That night, she wrote a letter, just in case, to whoever finds this. "My name is Lydia Grant Cole. If I am dead, know that Robert Dawson killed me, just as he killed my father, just as he killed Marcus Dawson. just as he killed Hosea. The evidence is in the box beneath the oak tree at the northeast corner of the property. Use it. Make him pay. She sealed it, hid it where it would be found if things went wrong. Then she picked up her rifle and kept watch. The third night, Ethan returned. He came in darkness, slipping through the gaps in Dawson's blockade that had grown lax with time. Mercer was with him, exhausted but determined. Lydia saw them from the window. She was out the door before they had dismounted. She threw her arms around Ethan so fiercely it hurt. "I thought you were dead." "I thought. I'm here. I came back. I told you I would." She showed him the poison bottle, told him what she had found. His face went hard. "Then we don't just have testimony about Marcus. We have evidence of an ongoing murder conspiracy. Is it enough? With Mercer's testimony and your evidence and Marcus's letter and what I saw in that basement shrine? It's more than enough. We just have to get it to someone who'll act on it." They sat together through the night, planning, preparing. Mercer slept in the corner, exhausted from the journey. As dawn approached, Lydia took Ethan's hand. "I need to tell you something, before whatever happens tomorrow." "What?" "When my father made us marry, I hated you. Hated that I needed saving. Hated that a stranger was my only option." She met his eyes. In the dim light, they looked softer than he had ever seen them. "But somewhere between that first night and this one, you stopped being a stranger. You became everything." She kissed him, not the desperate kiss before he left. Something softer, something that spoke of a future, not just survival. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know. This marriage ain't business anymore, not for me, not for me either. Not for a long time now." They held each other as the sun rose, the same sun that had risen on their forced wedding, now rising on something real. "When this is over, I want to marry you again, properly, with rings and flowers and witnesses who actually want to be there. Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise, one I intend to keep." They made their plan in the cold hours before sunrise. Mercer would slip away at dawn, carry copies of all the evidence to Cheyenne, to Judge Hargrove. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lydia would give Dawson what he wanted, or make him think they were. "You want to use me as bait. I want to end this. The only way to do that is to make Dawson commit to something he can't deny or cover up." It was dangerous. It might get one or both of them killed, but it was also their only chance. Lydia agreed. Dawn came cold and clear. The sky turned pink, then orange, then gold. Beautiful. Indifferent to the violence about to unfold. Mercer slipped away in the early light, riding hard for Cheyenne, carrying evidence that could bring down the most powerful man in Wyoming territory. As the sun climbed higher, Lydia walked out onto the porch, unarmed, hands visible. She called out to Dawson's men. "Tell your boss I'm ready to talk, just him and me. No guns, at the crossroads, 1 hour." The crossroads was neutral ground, a junction where the valley road met the mountain trail. Lydia stood alone, the morning sun behind her. Dawson approached on horseback. For once he was alone. He was that confident. "I knew you'd come to your senses eventually. Your mother was stubborn too. But she would have yielded in the end, if Silas hadn't. My father didn't do nothing. You did. You've been killing him for months, ain't you? Poison in his medicine, slow enough to look natural." Dawson's expression flickered. Surprise, then amusement. "You're cleverer than I gave you credit for." "Yes. Silas had to go. He was the only thing standing between us. There ain't no us. There never will be. You don't understand yet, but you will. Your mother understood in the end. When she was dying, she apologized to me, said she should have chosen me from the start. You're lying. Am I? I was with her when she died, held her hand, told her I'd take care of you." She smiled, Lydia. She was grateful. Lydia's composure cracked. This was what he wanted, to unsettle her, to make her doubt everything she believed. "Come with me now and I'll forget about the husband. He can live, leave the territory and never return. Or resist. And I'll make you watch him die the way I made you watch Marcus. From his hidden position, Ethan heard everything. He had his rifle trained on Dawson, but the shot was risky. Miss and Lydia was dead. Then he saw what Lydia could not. Dawson's men circling around, breaking the alone agreement. He called out before he could think about the consequences. Lydia, behind you. Everything happened fast. Dawson drew on Lydia. She dropped and rolled as Ethan fired from his position. The bullet hit Dawson in the shoulder, spun him around. Dawson's men converged. Lydia produced a pistol she had hidden in her skirts and dropped the first one. Ethan covered her retreat, firing from his position. Kill him! Kill him! 3 of Dawson's men fell. 2 more fled when they saw their boss wounded and the situation turning. The rest pressed forward. Then new riders appeared, coming fast from the direction of Medicine Rock. Sheriff Briggs, with 4 deputies. The first time he had appeared with a full posse. "Everybody stop! Put your weapons down!" Dawson clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with rage. "About time, Briggs. Arrest them. They shot me. Attempted murder. I saw what happened, Dawson. You drew first, and I heard what you admitted to. Poisoning Silas Grant. Confessing to watching Marcus die." Dawson's face went pale. "You work for me, Briggs. Remember what I pay you." "I remember. I also remember the man I used to be, before I sold my badge." Briggs looked at Lydia, then at Ethan. "An old man came through town yesterday. Black fella. Couldn't speak. Dying from knife wounds. He managed to write out a message before he passed. Told us everything. The murder, the poison, the ledgers. Said there was a witness heading to Cheyenne with proof. Hosea. Even dying, he had completed the mission. Had sent word ahead. I've looked the other way too long, not anymore." Dawson realized it was over. The mask of civilized cruelty fell away, revealing the madman underneath. "You can't do this. I am this territory without me." He lunged for Lydia, drawing a hidden knife. Ethan moved without thinking, put himself between them. The knife caught him in the side, but his pistol was already pressed to Dawson's head. "Give me a reason. Please." Dawson froze. For a long moment, death hung in the air. Then Lydia's voice, steady despite everything. "Don't. He don't deserve a quick death. He deserves to live long enough to watch everything he built crumble. He deserves to die in a cell, alone, the way he tried to make me feel all these years." Ethan held a moment longer, then lowered the gun. "Take him, Sheriff, before I change my mind." Briggs arrested Dawson. As he was dragged away, Dawson screamed at Lydia. "This ain't over. You're mine, Eleanor. You've always been mine." He was not even seeing Lydia anymore, just the ghost of a woman dead for 19 years. Ethan collapsed from his wound. Lydia caught him, screaming for help. "Stay with me. You promised me. You promised." "I keep my promises." Then everything went dark. 3 weeks later, Ethan woke in a real bed. The bed in the ranch house. The one he had never been allowed to share. Lydia was beside him, asleep in a chair, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she had not slept properly in days. He tried to move, and pain shot through his side like lightning. Lydia woke instantly. "Don't move. The doctor said you're lucky." The knife missed everything important by a quarter inch. What happened? Dawson. Arrested. Being held in the Medicine Rock jail until he can be transferred to the territorial prison in Laramie. The circuit judge arrived early. News of the evidence traveled fast. Over the next several days, Lydia told him everything Jacob Mercer had reached Cheyenne. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus's letter, the shrine photographs Ethan had memorized and later sketched, the poison bottle, the ledger of bribes. Judge Hargrove issued warrants immediately. The trial was swift. Multiple witnesses came forward once they learned Dawson was really facing justice. Ranchers he had driven out, officials who had been threatened into compliance, even some of his own men who were tired of the violence. Robert Dawson was convicted of murder in the first degree for killing his son Marcus. Murder in the first degree for poisoning Silas Grant. Accessory to murder for Hosea. 23 counts of bribery. 12 counts of destruction of property. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The sentence was life imprisonment in the Wyoming Territorial Prison in Laramie. The judge considered the death penalty, but decided that watching his empire dismantled while trapped behind bars was more fitting. Judge Hargrove's words rang through the courtroom. Robert Dawson, you have used your wealth and position to terrorize this territory for 2 decades. You murdered your own son for the crime of loving someone you couldn't possess. You poisoned a man slowly over months for the crime of protecting his daughter. You represent everything this territory must rise above if we are ever to become a state worthy of the Union. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Dawson had to be carried from the courtroom. He kept muttering Eleanor over and over, a broken man lost in a delusion that had consumed his entire life. Clara Dawson visited Lydia after the trial. It's done. He'll never hurt anyone again, because of Marcus and Hosea, and everyone who had the courage to stand up, and you. Don't forget yourself, child. You could have broken years ago. Instead, you waited, planned, and won. Clara had inherited control of the Dawson Ranch, but she was breaking it up, selling it in pieces to the small ranchers Robert had driven out, returning what had been stolen. She offered Lydia a portion, but Lydia refused. I have my valley. That's all I ever wanted. Before Clara left, she handed Lydia a small box. This was Marcus's. He would have wanted you to have it. Inside was an engagement ring, simple, beautiful, clearly chosen with love rather than wealth. Lydia held it to her heart. Thank you for everything. When Ethan was strong enough to stand, he discovered the full extent of his injuries. The knife had damaged nerves in his side. He would recover most of his mobility. But one thing was permanent. His right hand, his gun hand, would never be steady enough for a quick draw again. You can still shoot, but not the way you used to. For most things, it won't matter. But if you were thinking of going back to being a lawman, I wasn't. Later, alone with Lydia, he spoke the truth. Does it bother you, losing that? 3 months ago, I never wanted to touch a gun again. Now I've killed 3 men and crippled myself defending someone I love. It should bother me more than it does, and I'd do it again, every time. Because the man I was before couldn't save anyone. The man I am now, he saved you. That night, Lydia came to him, to their bed now. You mentioned something about marrying me properly, with rings and flowers. I did. I think I'd like that. Soon. Before the snow comes. She showed him Marcus's ring. Clara said Marcus would want me to be happy. I think using his ring to start our real marriage would honor what he gave his life for. The belief that love can survive anything. Ethan took her hand, his damaged hand, the one he usually hid. Then that's what we'll do. A perfect autumn day dawned over Grant Valley, leaves gold and red, mountains standing guard. The little church in Medicine Rock was packed with people who had come to see the couple who brought down Robert Dawson finally get their happy ending. Sheriff Briggs was there. He had resigned his position, now ran a feed store, trying to make amends for the years he had looked the other way. Clara Dawson sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, thinking of the nephew she had loved, the justice he had finally received. Lydia walked down the aisle in her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. The silk whispered against the wooden floor. Sunlight caught the tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. Ethan waited at the altar, wearing a borrowed suit, his damaged hand hidden in his pocket, his eyes fixed on the woman walking toward him. This time, when the preacher asked if they took each other, both voices were strong and sure. I do, I do. This time there was a ring. Marcus's ring worn on a chain around her neck close to her heart, and a new band on her finger. Simple gold, bought with honest money from honest work. This time when they kissed, it meant everything. 1 year later, the valley had healed. The barn was rebuilt, bigger than before. The herd had grown to 50 head. Henderson, the neighboring rancher, who had once been too afraid to help, now traded cattle with them as equals. Ethan stood on the hill overlooking the valley, the hill with 4 graves now: Silas, Eleanor, Hosea, and a small marker for Marcus, moved here at Lydia's request. He comes home now, she had said when they placed the stone. He belongs with the people who loved him. Lydia joined him on the hill, moving more slowly than usual, 7 months pregnant, their first child growing strong inside her. You look thoughtful, just thinking about how we got here, about everyone who made this possible. He looked at the graves. Sometimes I wonder if they'd approve, your father forcing you to marry me, Marcus dying so young, Hosea sacrificing himself. They'd approve. She took his hand, his damaged hand, the one he usually hid. She had never once looked at it with anything but love. My father wanted me to be safe. I am. Marcus wanted me to be loved. I am. Hosea wanted me to be free. I am. They'd all approve. And Eleanor. Lydia was quiet for a moment. The wind stirred her hair, carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. My mother wanted me to choose for myself, not to be forced into anything by any man. And you know what? I did choose. Maybe not at first, but every day since then I've chosen you. That's what she would have wanted. They stood together as the sun began to set. I still think about Marcus sometimes, not in a way that should worry you, but he was part of my life, part of how I became who I am. I know. Does that bother you? That my wife loved someone before me? Someone good who deserved her? No. It tells me she knows what love is worth, and she chose to give it to me anyway. He turned to face her. I'll never try to replace him. I can't. But I can love you the way he would have wanted you to be loved. Completely. Without holding back. Is that enough? She touched his face, her fingers gentle on his jaw. It's everything. The next morning, they woke together as the sun rose over the mountains. Do you remember our first sunrise as husband and wife? Ethan pulled her closer. I remember thinking I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, and now I think it was the best gamble I ever took. She laughed. A real laugh, free and full of joy. The kind of laugh he had not heard from her in all the months of fighting and fear. If it's a girl, I want to name her Eleanor, for my mother. And if it's a boy, Daniel, for your brother. Ethan's eyes filled with tears he did not try to hide. I think he'd like that. I think he'd finally believe I didn't fail him. You didn't fail him, Ethan. You were just too late once. But you've been on time every moment since. For me, for our home, for our future. They stood on the porch watching the sunrise paint the valley gold. The first time we watched a sunrise together, you were a stranger who bought my future for $3,000 and a promise. And now you're the man I would have chosen anyway. Contract or not, land or not, just you. He pulled her close, one hand resting on her swelling belly, feeling their child kick against his palm. Silas Grant set a price for his valley. I thought I was paying in cash. Turns out I was paying in something much more valuable. My heart. Was it worth it? Every penny, every heartache, every scar. The sun climbed higher. The valley spread before them, green and gold and beautiful. The mountains standing guard, the creek running clear. The graves on the hill watching over the land they had died protecting. Silas Grant asked an impossible price for his valley. Marry my daughter, by sunrise. Ethan Cole paid that price thinking he was buying land. Instead, he found something worth more than any acreage. A partner who would stand beside him through fire and fear. A love forged in struggle. A home built not just on soil, but on sacrifice and choice. Some bargains seem unfair at the start, but reveal themselves as gifts in the end. This was one of them. The sun rose higher. A new day began. And in Grant Valley, two people who started as strangers woke up as family. The kind that is earned, not given. That is the only kind that lasts. Down in the valley, the cattle grazed peacefully. The new barn stood strong and sturdy. The house that had once smelled of death and desperation now smelled of bread baking and coffee brewing, and the sweet promise of a child soon to come. Lydia leaned against Ethan's shoulder. I used to think this valley was a prison, the place I was trapped, watching Dawson circle closer every year, waiting for the day he would finally take everything. And now it's home. Really, truly home. Because you're here, he kissed the top of her head. I spent 10 years looking for a place to belong. Turns out belonging ain't about the land at all. It's about the people you choose to build your life with. When did you figure that out? The night you kissed me before I left to find Mercer, when I had something to come back to for the first time in my life. They watched the sunrise until the pink faded to blue, and the day stretched out before them full of ordinary work and ordinary joy. Somewhere in the territorial prison in Laramie, Robert Dawson sat in a cell muttering to a woman who had been dead for 19 years. His empire crumbled, his name destroyed, his obsession finally reaching its inevitable end. But that was not their concern anymore. Their concern was the fence that needed mending, the cattle that needed tending, the nursery that needed finishing before winter came. Their concern was each other, and the life they were building together. One sunrise at a time, Silas Grant made a desperate bargain on his deathbed, forced his daughter to marry a stranger, set events in motion that would end in fire and blood and a reckoning 20 years in the making. But out of that desperation came something neither of them expected. Love. Real love. The kind that grows not from flowers and pretty words, but from standing together when everything falls apart. The price of Grant Valley was a marriage by sunrise. The reward was a lifetime of sunrises shared with someone worth fighting for. Some prices are worth paying. Some bargains turn out to be blessings in disguise. And some strangers become the family you were always meant to find. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.